Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to another episode of Wrestling with the Word. I'm Coleman-Hill, a very big Jesus fan, just love some Jesus. And today I'm just going to go through some of the Word with you and share some thoughts I've been wrestling with and how we can kind of begin to apply the Word of God to our lives. Recently, I've been in John a lot, in the Gospel of John, reading through it. Our church is doing a reading plan, and right now, or we just got done with John, actually. Now we're in Revelations, but we just got done with John. And so I have all these thoughts in my head about John and just them thinking about John, jotting notes down about verses in John. And today we're going to talk about John 13, verses 3 through 9. And just give a broad view of what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about what it means to really give your life over to the Lord. And kind of who Jesus is and why we're going to be able to give our lives to him. So let's go ahead and dive right into it. John 13, verse 3. Here we go. Jesus knew that the Father in heaven had given him authority over everything, and he had come from God and would return from God. So right here, John is helping kind of show us that Jesus knows who he is and how powerful and how worthy and how glorious he really is. Right? It's stating that he knows he has authority over everything. And it's stating that he had come from God and returned from God. He knows where he's from and he knows where he's headed. He knows who he is, right? Let's go verse 4. So he got up from the table, took off his robe, wrapped a towel around his waist, and poured water into a basin. Then he began to wash the disciples' feet, drying them with the towel he had around them. So in these three verses alone, verse 3, 4, and 5, we're not yet to the meat of these verses. We're not yet to the meat and what we can learn from this. But what we can see from this is Jesus just loving us and serving us in a way he does not have to. It states the authority he has over this world, the authority he has in heaven. It states that he knows where he's come from and where he's going. And then he still got up, wrapped a towel around his waist, right? Got on his knees, begins to wash the disciples' feet, which in this day and time, these are nasty feet, right? Like nasty feet. They're walking around in sandals, right? Probably got infections, I won't lie. Like there's probably nasty feet, right? And also you have to understand that back in this time, doing that was just an act of a servant. Like back then, this was something that low servants would do. Servants that were just house servants that just did things around the house. And Jesus is doing this action even though he has all authority. He's given him authority over everything. And he knows where he's from and he knows where he's going, and yet he still did this act of serving his disciples. So let's go to verse 6. When Jesus came to Simon Peter, Peter said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus replied, "You don't understand what I'm doing, but someday you will." "No," Peter protested, "you will never wash my feet." Jesus replied, "Unless I wash you, you won't belong to me." Simon Peter exclaimed, "Then wash my hands and head as well, Lord, not just my feet." These set of verses are so beautiful. And what Jesus is saying here is something that we do not deserve. When I say I get in awe of the world, in awe of the word, it doesn't mean I'm sitting here like a gaze. It just means I have this feeling in my heart where I'm just like, is Jesus really saying this about us? Is Jesus really saying this about his disciples, humans who deserve nothing? I'm in awe of this and what Jesus is saying. So in verse 6, he says, when Jesus came to Simon Peter, Peter said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" As people, sometimes when we come to know Christ, we can do this thing where we can say, "Jesus, yes, you can have this part of my life, but do you really want this part? Jesus, you can have the part where I'm at church and I do the right things, I help that person. But do you really want the part where I'm going out with my friends and doing things that I shouldn't be doing? Do you really want that part? Or Jesus, do you really want to see me in this time where I'm alone and I'm doing something I shouldn't be doing? Do you want that part of me as well?" I've struggled with that. I've said Jesus doesn't want to see that part of me. Why would he want to be in that part of my life? But this is how Jesus replies to you. You have to think, this is real life. This really happened. This isn't fake. This isn't a cartoon. It says, Jesus replied, "You don't understand now what I'm doing, but someday you will." And then he says something like that to us. And then Peter says, no. He protested. That means with emotion. He said, no, you will never wash my feet. We can see Jesus as someone who is in heaven with all of his glory and say, you should never come into this part of my life. But when we say things like this, we forget what Jesus has already told us. And what does he say to Peter when he says this? Jesus replied, unless I wash you, you won't belong to me. Unless you allow me to wash you clean, you will not belong to me. Jesus is saying, not only do I want to be in that part of your life, but I need to be in that part of your life for you to belong to me. Jesus wants to see your porn addiction. Jesus wants to see your drug use. Jesus wants to see how you treat people outside of church. Jesus wants to be in your schools when you're doing things you shouldn't be doing. Jesus wants to be in those parts of your life so that he can wash you clean. The dirtiest parts, the parts where we think no one wants to see us. Jesus wants to be with you in that trauma you had when you were little. Jesus wants that part of you. He says, unless I am part of you in that life, in that part of your life, you can't belong to me. So let's move on to verse 9. After Jesus tells him this, unless I wash you, you won't belong to me. How Peter replies here is also a beautiful thing, because this is how we should reply when we realize this is who Jesus is. Peter exclaimed. He said, then wash my hands, my head as well, Lord, not just my feet. Lord, if you're saying you want to be in this part of my life and I can't belong to you unless that's how it is, then Lord, take my whole life. Take everything. Take all my baggage. Take all my dirtiness. Take all of it, because I want to be with you. I want to belong to you. Jesus in John 15, I talked about this in my last episode, talks about the vine and the branches, and he talks about remaining in him. We can't remain in him unless we belong to him, and he's saying you can't belong to me unless I can wash you. We have to allow Jesus to come into our lives and wash us clean. Wash us clean, right? And we can begin to think that when we mess up, that we've canceled that out. You're downplaying who Jesus Christ is. You're downplaying what he did on the cross. You're downplaying his love for you. You're downplaying the Father sending his Son down and letting him be mocked, beaten, stabbed in the side, put a crown of thorns on his head, spit on, joked at, just all terrible things while he had no sin. You're laughing at the fact that he said, forgive these people for they don't know what they're doing. You're downplaying that. All he cares about is your heart. He cares that you are with him and you love him and you're chasing after him. Because if you're doing those things, your life will bear fruit. John 15, if you remain in him, your life will bear fruit and it will glorify the Father in heaven. That's the goal, is to remain in him and love him. That is so good. Okay. So yeah, Peter says this, and you know what, we're gonna let's see where we're at with time. Okay, we're gonna wrap up right here. Jesus replied, this is verse 10, we're gonna go a little further. Jesus replied, a person who has bathed all over does not need to wash except for the feet to be entirely clean. And you disciples are clean, but not all of you. For Jesus knew who would betray him. That is what he meant when he said, not all of you are clean. Now, verse 11 doesn't really apply to what we're talking about right now. He's talking about Judas, who will betray him later on. But a person who has bathed all over does not need to wash except for the feet to be entirely clean, and you disciples are clean, but not all of you. And you know what? When I'm reading this, again, this is wrestling with the word. So these are just my thoughts. This is purely my thoughts right here. But when he says this, I think it's cool because he's saying, you may be clean everywhere else. You may have it looking like you don't need Jesus. But your feet, though. But that sounds funny, but your feet, though. You know what I'm saying? But your dirty feet, though. You have a little baggage to you. You know what I'm saying? Like, don't start acting like you perfect. Okay? You got a little baggage to you. So that's what I want to talk to you about today. Hey, let's begin to allow Jesus to wash us clean entirely. Let's begin to allow Jesus to do that. Hey, I love you all. Thank you for listening. God loves you. Let's chase Jesus this week. See ya.